morning. We are in video 3 of research methodology and IPR. In video 1 and 2, we covered with the basics of what is meant by research, the meaning and definitions given by various individuals regarding research, the different types of research and the research methods. And also in video 2, we learned about research methodology, characteristics of a good research, objectives of research, and then the research approach being qualitative and quantitative. Also we learned the differences between those two and types of research including descriptive, exploratory, applied and causal research methods. So in today's video, that is video 3, we will be learning about the process of research in detail. As you can see in the slide, we have a diagram which depicts the process of research, that is how the research has to be conducted. So the first step being defining research problem, and then reviewing the concepts and theories, reviewing previous research findings, and then that is basically which includes your reviewing of the literature, and then formulating hypothesis, design research including the sample design, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and then interpreting and reporting, wherein you can find there is a loop connecting like F and FF, that is feedback and feed forward, wherein the blocks in between they can go back and again, it's like the data from them are required at the earlier stages also, or they can go back to that and then the loop continues. So that's what it shows, right? So it indicates the research process consists of number of closely related activities as shown in the steps 1 to 7th. So it's like the first step determines the nature of the last step to be undertaken. If subsequent procedures have not been taken into account in the early stages, serious difficulties may arise which may even prevent the completion of the study. So one should remember that the various steps involved in the research process are not mutually exclusive, nor they are separate and distinct. They may not necessarily follow each other in any specific order, and the researcher has to be constantly anticipating at each step in the research process. So the first step being defining the research problem or formulating the research problem. There are two types of research problems, that is those which relate to the states of nature and those which relate to relationship between variables. At the very outset, the researcher must single out the problem he wants to study. That is, he must decide the general area of interest or aspect of a subject matter that he would like to inquire into. Initially, the problem may be stated in a broad general way, and then the ambiguities, if any, which relates to the problem again, can be resolved. Then the feasibility of a particular solution has to be considered before a working formulation of the problem will be set up. And then the best way of understanding the problem is to discuss with one's own colleagues or with those having some expertise in that matter. In an academic institution, the researcher can also seek the help from a guide who is usually an experienced man and has several research problems in mind, or who himself has undergone different kinds of research studies. The researcher again, what he has to do is he has to examine all available literature to get himself acquainted with the selected problem. He may review two types of literatures, the conceptual and the concepts and theories, and the empirical literature, right? So formulation of the problem often follows a sequential pattern where a number of formulations are set up, each formulation more specific than the preceding one, each one phrased in more analytical terms, and each more realistic in terms of the available data and resources. Next step is extensive literature survey, which also includes reviewing of concepts and theories and also previous research findings. So once the problem is formulated, a brief summary of it should be written down. It is compulsory for a research worker writing a thesis for a PhD degree to write a synopsis of the topic and submit it to the necessary committee for approval, right? So researchers should undertake extensive literature review connected with the problem. For this purpose, abstracting and indexing journals and published or unpublished bibliographies are the first place wherein the researcher can go for the data. You can also refer to academic journals, conference proceedings, government reports, books, etc. And again, it must be tapped depending on the nature of the problem. So next step being development of working hypothesis, that is the formulating of hypothesis. So what do we do in this? See, when you are developing a hypothesis, what happens is you will have to have a proper literature review. So an extensive literature review, researcher should state in clear terms the working hypothesis. It is tentative assumption made in order to draw out and test its logical or empirical consequences. As such, the manner in which research hypotheses are developed is particularly important since they provide the focal point for research. They also affect the manner in which tests must be conducted in the analysis of data and indirectly the quality of data which is required for the analysis. So, it also shows that. How does one go about developing working hypothesis is we can describe it in following way. For example, discussions with colleagues and experts about the problem, its origin, and the objectives in seeking a solution. Examination of data and records if available concerning the problem for possible trends, peculiarities, and other clues. Review of similar studies in the area of the studies or similar problem which the researcher is facing. Also, exploratory personal investigation, which involves original field interviews on a limited scale with interested parties and individuals with a view to secure greater insight into the practical aspects of the problem. So, working hypotheses arise as a result of a prior thinking about the subject, examination of the available data and material, including related studies and the council of experts and interested parties. Working hypotheses are more useful when stated in precise and clearly defined terms. Also, it has to be stated on par with the problem statement. Next is preparing the research design, which also includes sample design, right? So, sample research design is the research problem having been formulated. You know the formulation, hypothesis and everything. And next you need to create the research design, right? It will have to state the conceptual structure within which research would be conducted. The preparation of such a design document facilitates research to be as efficient as possible, yielding maximum information. So the basic function of research design is to provide for the collection of relevant evidence with minimal expenditure of effort, time and money. And also, see, these research purposes may be grouped into the following categories: exploration, description, diagnosis and experimentation. So flexible research design, which provides opportunity for considering many different aspects of a problem, is considered appropriate if the purpose of the research study is that of exploration. So there are several research designs such as experimental, non-experimental, informal, formal, Latin square designs and all those, which we will be learning in the successive chapters. And then you also determine sample design. So what do you mean by sample design? A complete enumeration of all the items in the population is known as census or a sample, right? So you are going to write the information required for selection of sample, the number of samples or the sampling methods, sampling techniques, sampling methodology. So the sample design document consists of all these. And coming to the sampling, it's like, see, in hypothesis we had two hypotheses, null and alternative hypothesis. So if null hypothesis is meant in a negative way, alternatives vice versa. That is, we used to draft it or project it in a positive way, right? On a positive note. So in the same way, so again we have here probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Like probability samples are those based on simple random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling or cluster sampling, right? So wherein you have the probability of that sample being selected. Non-probability samples is they do not allow the researcher to determine the probability, and those are called as convenience sampling, judgment sampling, quota sampling techniques and all those. So these sampling techniques will be learnt in the later modules. So basically sample design is a plan determined before any data is actually collected for obtaining a sample. Sampling unit is the most elementary unit which would be a part of the study, that is in a survey or newspaper readership pattern, a single household comprising of all the members of the household. They can be taken as a sampling unit. And size of the sample depends on factors like the availability of time, and funds also to the researcher, the availability of the researcher, the ability of the researcher, as well as size of the population and nature of the population basically, right? And then method of drawing a sample. Probability method of sampling involves giving every member a known and unbiased chance of being a part of the sample. In non-probability method, an element of bias is involved. The probability of a unit being a part of the sample is not known at all. And then the next step is collecting the data. So what do you mean by this? Data collection. You have the hypothesis being stated, you have the sample size, sample units, and then you go with the data collection. In dealing with any real life problem, it is often found that data at hand are inadequate, and hence it becomes necessary to collect data that are appropriate. There are several ways of collecting the appropriate data which differ considerably in context of money, cost, time, and other resources. So we have two types of data, that is primary data and secondary data. Primary data can be collected either through experiment or through survey. If the researcher conducts an experiment, he observes some quantitative measurements of the data with the help of which he examines the truth contained in his hypothesis. But in the case of a survey, data can be collected by any or one of the following ways: by observation, that is observation is collection of information by just investigators' observation without interviewing the respondents. So the information obtained, it relates to what is currently happening and is not complicated by either the past behavior or future intentions or attitudes of respondents. So this method is no doubt an expensive method, and the information provided by this method is also limited. It might be through personal interviews. So what do you mean by that? So personal interviews is the investigator follows a rigid procedure and seeks answer to a set of preconceived questions through one-to-one interview. It might be through telephonic interviews also, wherein the respondents might not be called to that particular location. He might be contacted through telephonic conversations also, by mailing of questionnaires and through schedules, and also through the direct questionnaire method. So here, coming to the execution of the project, so what happens is, it is a very important step in the research process. If the execution of the project proceeds on correct lines, the data to be collected would be adequate and dependable. The researcher should see that the project is executed in a systematic manner as well as on time. That is, see, with perfect data, reliable data, your project or your research survey to be reaching the output, right? So that's what a researcher expects. So if the survey is to be conducted by means of a structured questionnaires, data can be readily machine processed. In such a situation, questions as well as possible answers may be coded also. Next, coming to the analysis of data. So what does it tell? After the data has been collected, the researcher turns to the task of analyzing the data. So the analysis of data requires a number of closely related operations, such as establishment of categories, the application of these categories to raw data, either through coding, tabulation, and then drawing statistical inferences. The unwieldy data should necessarily be condensed into a few manageable groups and tables for further analysis. Thus, the researcher should classify the raw data into some purposeful and usable categories. Coding operation is usually done at this stage, through which the categories of data are transformed into symbols that may be tabulated and counted. So editing is a procedure that improves the quality of the data for coding. with coding, the stage will be ready for tabulation. So tabulation is part of the technical procedure. After your coding only your tabulation comes, wherein you classify the data and you put that in the form of tables, and you can use mechanical devices also at this point of time. So analysis work after tabulation is generally based on the computation of various percentages, coefficient, relations and all those with statistical tools and statistical formulas, right? And next is your hypothesis testing. So what do you do in hypothesis testing? After analyzing the data, the researcher is in position to test the hypothesis if he has formulated earlier. He'll check whether the facts support the hypothesis or they happen to be contrary. This is a usual question which should be answered while testing hypothesis. And various tests like chi-square test, t-test, f-test, which are developed by statisticians for the purpose of testing the hypothesis. And we can test through the above test depending upon the nature and object of research inquiry. So this hypothesis testing will result in either accepting the hypothesis or rejecting the hypothesis. So if the researcher had no hypothesis to start with, and then the research process will not be able to follow or flow in the proper direction, right? Generalization and interpretation, that is data interpretation, and you are writing the report. So if a hypothesis is tested and upheld several times, it may be possible for the researcher also to arrive at generalization, that is to build up a theory. As a matter of fact, the real value of research lies in its ability to arrive at certain generalizations. If the researcher had no hypothesis to start with, he might seek to explain his findings on the basis of some theory, which is also known as interpretation. That is, you are going to interpret the numbers with theoretical form. So that is what your generalization and interpretation means. So next is preparation of the report or the thesis. The researcher has to prepare the report of what he has been done in the past so many years, right? So this report writing, it consists of so many steps. That is, it consists, let us go one by one. The layout, basically it consists of the preliminary pages, the main text and the end matter. In its preliminary pages, a report should carry title and date, followed by acknowledgements also and forwards also. Then there should be a table of contents followed by list of tables and list of graphs and charts if any. And then the main text. So first is preliminary pages, next coming to main text. So the main text of the report should have the following parts: the introduction, summary of findings, main report and conclusion. And then the end matter, alright. In introduction, it should contain a clear statement of the objective of the research and an explanation of the methodology adopted in accomplishing the research. The scope of the study along with various limitations should as well be stated in this part. Summary of findings. After introduction, there would appear a statement of findings and recommendations in non-technical language. So if the findings are extensive, they should be summarized as well. Coming to the main body. So these are all the main text which comes under main text. So coming to the main report. The main body of the report should be presented in logical sequence and broken down into readily identifiable sections. And coming to the conclusion. So towards the end of the main text, researcher should again put down the results of his research study and precisely and clearly. So at the end of the report, appendix should be enlisted in respect to all data which is being derived. Bibliography, that is a various list of books, journals, etc. can be also stated over here in the end. So this was about the report, right? So what are the criteria of good research? We have already written down, and the report should be written in concise and objective style. And the report also, the charts and illustrations in the report has to be made proper naming, right? Various constraints which are experienced in the process of business research can also be noted down. So this was the entire research process which we have learned through that block diagram. So it is one of the important topics of your research methodology. So I think we are done with video 3, and in video 4 we'll continue the rest of module 1. Thank you.